The air inside the forward operating base was heavy with dust and diesel, a scent every man in the SEAL platoon had grown used to, though none ever liked it. The generator hummed in the background, lights flickered above, and a thin film of sweat already clung to their necks. Outside, Afghanistan's unforgiving desert stretched for miles, a sea of jagged peaks and hostile silence. Inside, however, all eyes were locked on a flickering projection screen where satellite images of a remote valley came into focus. The valley looked ordinary to an outsider: mud brick houses scattered across barren earth, goat paths crisscrossing the ridgelines, and a river cutting through its spine. But the men in this room knew better. Intelligence reports suggested that the valley wasn't just another backwater settlement. Somewhere among those huts lived a man whose name was whispered across the region with both fear and reverence. He was said to be a master of ambushes, the architect of countless attacks against coalition convoys. Dozens of soldiers had died because of his tactics. Now it was the SEAL's job to bring him in or put him down. Lieutenant Commander Jack Rhines stood at the front of the room, pointing at the grainy images with a laser pointer. Tall, lean, with sharp eyes that could pierce through excuses and hesitation alike, Rhines carried himself like a man who had lived 100 lives in combat. His voice was calm, but carried the authority of someone who had buried too many brothers. "This is Al-Khali Valley," he began, tapping the image of the narrow gorge leading into the village. "Intel places the target here. Local informants confirm his presence. But make no mistake, this place is a fortress. High ridges on all sides, one main entry, multiple choke points. Perfect for an ambush. And if the locals are complicit, which I believe they are, we won't be walking into just a firefight. We'll be walking into a trap." The room stayed silent. The men listened with the quiet discipline drilled into them over years of training. Each of them had been through this process before: briefings, warnings, maps, and worst-case scenarios, but tonight carried a different weight. Something about the tone in Rhines' voice made the mission feel less like a plan and more like a gamble. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Baer Dalton leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. He was built like a tank, with arms that looked more suited for tearing doors off hinges than holding a rifle. "Sir, if it's that bad, why are we going in light?" he asked. His voice was low, gruff, the kind that rumbled in the chest before it reached the air. Rhines didn't flinch. Because command wants deniability. Too many boots, too much hardware, and it looks like a full assault. They want this quiet, surgical. No collateral damage. We go in, we take him. We get out. Baer's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He knew better than to argue with orders that came from levels far above his pay grade. Across the room, Petty Officer First Class Miguel Torres scribbled notes in a small waterproof pad. Torres was the team's medic, a wiry man with quick hands and quicker instincts. He glanced at the images of the valley and muttered under his breath, "Surgical, huh? Looks more like open-heart surgery in the middle of a gunfight." "Speak up, Doc," Rhines said, his eyes flicking toward him. Torres cleared his throat. "Sir, if we're pinned, extraction's gonna be hell. With those ridgelines, medevac will be dicey at best. If someone goes down, we'll be dragging him out under fire." Rhines didn't sugarcoat. "That's the reality. We all know the risks. But this target is worth it. His capture disrupts the entire insurgent network in this sector. That means fewer IEDs on roads, fewer ambush, fewer flag-draped coffins heading home. The weight of those words hung heavy in the room. Every man present had carried a coffin. Every man knew exactly what Rhines meant. Ensign David Holt, the youngest member of the team, shifted uneasily in his chair. He was fresh to combat, though he had trained harder than most to get here. His clean-shaven face still carried traces of youth, and his eyes, though determined, betrayed the storm of thoughts racing behind them. He asked what everyone else was thinking, but didn't want to say aloud. "Sir, what if the informants are wrong? What if it's a setup?" Rains looked at him for a long moment. Some leaders would have shut the question down, but Rains wasn't one of them. He respected honesty, even when it came from rookies. "If it's a setup, we adapt," Rains said evenly. "We fight our way out, and we survive. That's what SEALs do." The men nodded, some more reluctantly than others. As the briefing continued, maps were rolled out, call signs assigned, and contingencies discussed. Each man memorized his role, not because they trusted the plan, but because they trusted each other. Plans fell apart in seconds. Brotherhood did not. When the briefing ended, the men filed out into the night air. The base buzzed with activity rotors chopping from helicopters, engines rumbling, boots crunching gravel. The stars above were brilliant, but their beauty was lost on men preparing for war. In the armory, weapons were checked, rechecked, and checked again. Holt loaded his rifle with trembling fingers until Bear slapped him on the back. "Relax. Kid, just another walk in the park," Bear said, grinning. Holt forced a smile, though the park Bear spoke of was lined with mines and snipers. Torres packed his medical kit with quiet efficiency, sliding in bandages, morphine, and tools he prayed he wouldn't need. Across from him, another SEAL kissed a folded photo of his family before tucking it into his vest. Small rituals, silent prayers, each man had his way of facing the storm. Rains walked among them, eyes sharp, but words scarce. He didn't need to motivate them with speeches. These were warriors, forged by fire, who needed no reminders of duty. Still, he paused at Holt, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Trust your training," Rains said, "and trust your team. Fear keeps you sharp, but never let it control you." Holt nodded, the words settling into him like armor. As the night stretched, the team assembled by the helicopter. Rotor blades spun, kicking dust into the air, creating a haze that blurred the line between earth and sky. One by one, the SEALs climbed aboard, weapons strapped, faces hard with resolve. The bird lifted into the night, the base shrinking below them. The valley awaited, silent and dangerous, its secrets buried in shadow. None of them spoke, but each man knew they were heading into something far more perilous than a standard mission. Far below, in the darkness of the valley, insurgents were already preparing. Word of the Americans had traveled faster than any satellite. Eyes watched from ridges, weapons loaded, plans set. The SEALs were walking into a game where their enemy already knew the rules. And yet, amid that storm of danger, fate had other plans that would reveal themselves in the shape of a lone sniper, a shadow no one had counted on. The mission had begun. The helicopter blades thundered against the night sky, carrying the SEAL team deeper into the jagged Afghan mountains. Below them, the earth looked endless and barren, broken only by sharp ridges and narrow valleys that carved the desert into a maze of shadows. The men sat in silence, weapons cradled, eyes hidden behind night vision goggles. They had flown into combat countless times, but tonight carried an unease that none could quite shake. Lieutenant Commander Rains sat closest to the door, watching the landscape blur beneath them. His mind wasn't on the flight, it was on the valley ahead, all Kali, a place already infamous for swallowing units whole. He replayed the intelligence brief in his head, searching for cracks in the plan. Every instinct in him whispered that something about this mission was off, though he kept those doubts buried beneath a stone-hard expression. Beside him, Bear Dalton leaned against the wall of the bird, arms crossed, looking almost relaxed. But Rains knew better Dalton's calmness was just his way of conserving energy. His eyes, half-lidded, scanned every shadow, every flicker of light below, as if the terrain itself could betray them. Torres, the medic, tapped a rhythm on his knee. It was a nervous habit, though he would never admit it. In his pack lay enough supplies to patch up half the team if things went wrong. But deep down he knew, in a place like Alkali, sometimes no amount of medicine could bring a man back. Holt, the youngest, sat across from him. He gripped his rifle tighter than necessary, his knuckles white. He tried to steady his breathing, just as he had been taught in training, slow inhale, slow exhale. But his heart pounded like a drum, drowning out the roar of the rotors. The red light in the cabin flashed. 2 minutes to insertion. The men leaned forward, pulling down their night vision goggles. Rains gave the signal, and every man checked his gear one final time: magazines, optics, radios, grenades. The sound of Velcro and metal clicks filled the cabin. The helicopter descended into the darkness of a dry riverbed. Dust exploded upward, cloaking the team as they leapt out one by one, boots sinking into the soft earth. The bird lifted almost instantly, disappearing into the night, leaving behind a silence that pressed against their ears. Now, it was just them. The team moved quickly, falling into formation. Rains led, Bear covered rear, Torres and Holt sandwiched between veterans whose eyes had long ago adapted to war's rhythm. Their boots crunched against gravel, muffled by the hiss of wind moving through the canyon. Above them, the ridgelines loomed like watchtowers. Holt looked up, the hair on his neck rising. Through his goggles, the rocks seemed alive, shifting with shadows. He forced his eyes forward, but the unease wouldn't leave him. "Keep tight," Rains whispered into the coms. "No chatter unless necessary." They advanced through the valley, hugging the terrain, rifles scanning every angle. To their left, the river shimmered faintly under the slither of moonlight, its current sluggish, carrying debris downstream. On the opposite bank, mud brick houses dotted the slope, their windows black and empty. The village looked asleep, too asleep. Bear muttered over comms, voice low but edged with suspicion. "Sir, where's the damn watchdogs?" "No one out. No. Fires, no patrols. Doesn't feel right." Rains paused, raising a clenched fist to halt the team. He studied the village. In his years of combat, he had learned to trust silence less than gunfire. Gunfire was expected. Silence was a mask. "Eyes up," he ordered. Torres squinted through his scope. He could make out Shape's villagers watching from the shadows of doorways, children peeking through cracks and shutters. None approached. None fled. They just stood there, waiting. "They know," Torres whispered. "They know we're here." The team pushed on, tension coiling tighter with every step. Holt's breath fogged inside his mask, though the air was hot. He felt exposed, like a spotlight followed his every move. His rifle trembled slightly until he forced himself to tighten his grip. Minutes stretched into an hour as they crept deeper into the valley. They passed a crumbling stone wall, a broken-down truck abandoned in the dirt, goats tied to posts that bleated nervously as the team slipped by. Each small detail screamed of normalcy, but it all felt staged, too carefully arranged. The silence broke suddenly. From somewhere in the distance, a dog barked sharp, frantic, and then silenced in an instant. The sound echoed against the ridges before fading completely. The team froze, instincts screaming. "Movement. Ridge 2 o'clock," whispered one of the veterans. Through goggles, faint silhouettes appeared, darting between rocks. They were quick, disciplined, and positioned high. Rains cursed under his breath. They were compromised. "Keep moving," he ordered. "We're almost at the approach point." The SEALs picked up their pace, crossing into narrower terrain where the walls pressed closer on either side. Holt's gut tightened. The gorge felt like a funnel, designed to herd them into the kill zone. He wanted to say something, but his throat tightened. The words stuck. Ahead, the village came fully into view. Lanterns flickered in a few houses now, glowing faintly, though no one moved. It was as if the villagers had been instructed to remain indoors, leaving the streets eerily deserted. Bear's voice cut in again, harder this time. "Sir, this is bad ground. They're steering us." Rains hesitated only a moment, then signaled for the team to spread wider, taking cover positions along the walls and broken buildings. "Hold," he ordered. The team crouched low, rifles aimed at the ridgelines. The night was too quiet again, the kind of silence that presses against your chest until you can barely breathe. And then Holt saw it a glint, just a flash of light against the rocks high above. His instinct screamed louder than his brain. "Contact ridge," he shouted. The first gunshot split the night. A tracer round ripped through the air, exploding against the wall, inches from Bear's head. And then the valley lit up in chaos. From both ridges, muzzle flashes erupted, raining fire down on the seals. The ground shook as mortar struck near. The riverbank, throwing dirt and debris into the air. The men dove for cover, returning fire in controlled bursts, their training taking over even as their world became an inferno. Ambush! Rains roared into combs. Find cover, return. Fire now! Holt scrambled behind a collapsed wall, heart hammering so violently he thought it might give him away. He fired blindly at the ridge, ears ringing with the storm of gunfire. Beside him, Torres dragged a wounded teammate into cover, blood already soaking through his uniform. Bear unleashed a hail of suppressive fire, his booming weapon echoing like thunder. "Come get some, you bastards," he roared, defiance carrying over the storm. But even Bear knew the truth. They were pinned, outnumbered. The valley had become a kill box, and the enemy was everywhere. Rains pressed against the dirt, mind racing. He had suspected a trap, but the scale of it was worse than he imagined. Whoever commanded this ambush had studied the terrain well. Extraction was impossible. Reinforcements were too far. First time that night, Rains felt a flicker of doubt. This wasn't just a firefight. This was execution. And deep within his chest, he wondered, was this where the mission ended? Gunfire roared from every direction, echoing off the valley walls, until it felt as though the very earth itself had turned hostile. The seals were pinned, outnumbered, and fighting against shadows that moved like smoke across the ridges. "Lieutenant." Commander Rains pressed his shoulder hard against a jagged rock, teeth clenched as bullets chipped the stone inches from his head. He leaned out just long enough to squeeze off 3 precise bursts from his rifle, then ducked back, heart hammering, in rhythm with the explosions around them. "Keep your sectors," he shouted, voice rough but steady. "Stay disciplined." To his left, Bear Dalton braced behind the ruins of a collapsed wall, weapon roaring in rapid bursts. His figure loomed in the darkness like a statue of defiance, firing without hesitation. Every time an enemy muzzle flash lit the ridge, Bear's shots answered in kind. But even his relentless fire couldn't mask the truth. They were drowning under a tide of lead. Holt crawled to a shattered cart for cover, his chest heaving, ears ringing so violently that he could barely make out the shouts around him. Rookie fought panic, fighting to remember his training. Slow the breath. Find the target. Squeeze, don't yank. He steadied his rifle against the wheel and fired, each round controlled despite the fear gnawing at him. A shadow on the ridge staggered, crumpled. Holt blinked. He had just dropped his first confirmed kill. But there was no time to process. Another volley of tracer fire rained down, forcing him flat to the dirt as sparks showered his helmet. Torres. was already drenched in blood not his own, but his teammates'. Petty Officer Lane had taken a round through the thigh, and arterial blood sprayed every time Torres loosened his grip. He jammed a tourniquet high on the leg, twisting until Lane screamed, then secured it with practiced speed. "Stay with me?" Torres shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "You're not dying here. You hear me?" Lane's teeth chattered as he nodded weakly, his skin pale even in the green glow of night vision. Torres pulled him tighter against the wall, shielding him with his own body as bullets whipped overhead. Mortar fire crashed again, the blast sending tremors through the valley. One round struck close enough to lift Holt off the ground, the concussion leaving him dazed. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine, his vision swimming. Through the haze, he saw Bear drag another SEAL out of the open, tossing the man behind. Cover like he weighed nothing. "On your feet, kid," Bear growled, grabbing Holt by the vest. "We're not dead yet." Holt gasped, blinking the dust from his eyes, and raised his weapon again. Bear's rough shove grounded him, forcing his fear into focus. The enemy shouted from the ridges, voices carrying down in cruel chants. They had the high ground, the numbers, and the patience. They didn't need to rush. They only needed to squeeze the Americans until there was nothing left. Rains crawled low, bullets snapping over him, until he reached Torres and Lane. His gaze locked onto the wounded SEAL's leg bad, but not immediately fatal. Relief was fleeting. If they didn't extract soon, Lane wouldn't survive the night. "How long?" Rains shouted. Torres shook his head. "He needs medevac, but with those ridges? It's suicide for a bird to land." Rains cursed under his breath. The comms still spat static jammed, useless. They couldn't call for help, even if they wanted to. Another burst of gunfire raked their position, sending chips of stone into their faces. Rains fired back, controlled, deliberate, his shots finding targets with deadly efficiency. But for every enemy that fell, two more seemed to appear. Minutes dragged like hours. The firefight became relentless, a storm without pause. The SEALs rotated their fire, conserving ammo, but the supply dwindled faster than anyone wanted to admit. Bear slammed a fresh magazine into his weapon, teeth bared in a snarl. "Sir, we're burning through rounds too damn fast," he barked. "I know," Rains shouted back. "Make every shot count." Holt checked his pouches half, his magazines gone already. His hands trembled as he reloaded, but his shots grew steadier each time he fired. Fear was sharpening into focus, his survival instincts fusing with training. He wasn't the rookie anymore. He was a SEAL in the crucible of fire. But doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. What if this was it? What if they didn't make it out? He shoved the thought down and fired again. Suddenly, a rocket-propelled grenade whooshed down from the ridge, slamming into the riverbed with a deafening explosion. The blast ripped the ground open, showering them with rock and fire. The shockwave flung Holt and Torres backward, their ears ringing, their bodies bruised. Lane screamed as debris tore into his side. Bear roared in defiance, standing to fire his weapon in a full auto sweep across the ridge. "Come on, you bastards," he shouted, daring them to focus on him. His massive frame made him a beacon, but his fury carved space for the others to regroup. Rains dragged Torres and Holt back into cover, his face grim, eyes calculating. He saw the writing on the wall. They couldn't hold this forever. The enemy had them boxed, and no cavalry was coming. For the first time, the thought slipped through his iron discipline. He might not make it out of here, but he shoved it down. A leader couldn't afford despair. Not while his men still looked to him. "Hold this line," Rains bellowed, his voice echoing over the chaos. "We are not done." The SEALs answered with renewed fire, each man squeezing every ounce of fight from his body. The valley became a storm of bullets, shouts, and explosions. Dirt and smoke thickened the air until breathing burned their lungs. And yet, for all their ferocity, the truth was undeniable. They were trapped. Their ammo dwindled. Their wounded bled, and the enemy kept coming. Holt glanced at Rains, then at Bear, then at Torres, fighting desperately to keep Lane alive. In that moment, he understood the gravity. They weren't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to live long enough to make their deaths mean something. The thought sent a cold shiver through him. As another mortar whistled down, slamming into the earth just yards away, Holt clamped his hands over his ears, his teeth rattling from the concussion. His vision blurred. His world spun. And in that dizzy haze, one thought consumed him. If this is the end, God, let it be fast. But fate wasn't done with them yet. The night had turned into a furnace of fire and noise. Tracer rounds stitched red lines through the sky. Mortar pounded the valley floor, and the echoes of gunfire ricocheted endlessly off the canyon walls. The SEALs had been holding for what felt like an eternity, but the enemy showed no signs of letting up. If anything, their fire grew more coordinated, more precise, as though they were tightening the noose one pull at a time. Lieutenant Commander Rains crouched behind a jagged boulder, chest heaving, sweat mixing with grime. His rifle felt heavier with each reload, his magazines dwindling too quickly. He stole a glance over the top dozens of insurgents, moved like shadows along the ridges, firing down with cold precision. This wasn't a hasty skirmish. This was orchestrated. Someone had set the perfect trap, and he had led his men straight into it. Ammo check. Rains barked over the roar of gunfire. 2 mags left, Holt shouted, his voice high with strain. 3 here, Torres called. One hand pressed on Lane's bandaged leg as the other clutched his rifle. Lane groaned, slipping in and out of consciousness, his pale face glistening with sweat. 4 mags, Bear growled. His tone was calm, but Rains could hear the weight behind it. Bear was rationing every shot, firing only when muzzle flashes betrayed an enemy's position. Rains clenched his jaw. Make every round count. No spray, no waste. The order was unnecessary. These men knew discipline, but it was more than instruction. It was a reminder that they still had a leader, still had a chance, however small. A fresh barrage of bullets tore into their cover, showering them with rock shards. Holt ducked lower, his helmet ringing from a near miss. His breathing came fast and shallow, panic clawing at his chest. He pressed his back against the wall, eyes wide. Bear reached over, smacking the rookie's shoulder. Hey, eyes on me, Holt. You're still here. We're still breathing. Don't you dare freeze on me. Holt swallowed hard, nodded, and forced his rifle back up. His shots steadied, finding shapes in the shadows. One figure on the ridge crumpled, then another. It gave Holt a spark of hope, small, but enough to keep him moving. Mortar rounds whistled again, slamming into the riverbank with brutal force. The ground shook violently, dirt and water erupting into the air. One blast threw Torres flat, his med kit scattering across the rocks. He scrambled to gather supplies, cursing under his breath. "Sir," Torres shouted, voice ragged, "Lane's fading fast. He needs blood, he needs a bird. Without it, we don't have a bird," Rains snapped, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Do what you can." Torres pressed his lips together, jaw tight. He went back to work, his hands moving with desperate precision. Above them, the enemy taunts grew louder. Voices in Pashto rang out, mocking, calling them trapped animals. The psychological war was as relentless as the bullets. The insurgents didn't need to rush. They had time on their side. Rains knew it too. Every passing minute drained their ammo, their strength, their will. He scanned the ridgelines again, searching for any weakness, any gap to exploit. There was none. They were encircled. Bear caught his eye, a silent exchange passing between them. They both knew the truth. The odds were stacked to the breaking point. "Sir," Bear said, reloading with a heavy clack, "if it comes to it, we fight to the last round. Nobody gets taken alive." Rains held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod. The code was unspoken, but understood. Capture wasn't an option. Another explosion tore through their cover, showering them with debris. Holt coughed violently, his lungs burning from the dust. He wiped grit from his goggles and muttered, half to himself, half to anyone listening, "We can't. Hold this. We can't. Shut it down, Holt." Rains barked, his voice sharp as a whip. "We hold until I say otherwise. You hear me?" Holt snapped his head toward him, eyes wide, then nodded quickly. The authority in Rain's tone anchored him again. Still, doubt gnawed at every man. Even Bear, the immovable wall, felt the edge of despair scratching at his chest. They were SEALs trained for the impossible, hardened against fear, but every warrior had a breaking point, and the valley was designed to find it. Minutes dragged on. The firefight became a rhythm fire. Reload, duck, fire again. Each exchange chipped away at their ammo reserves, their bodies, their hope. Lane's breathing grew shallower, each gasp rattling like dry leaves. Torres whispered to him, words of comfort, though his own eyes screamed the truth. He was running. Out of options. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos. A distant whine different from mortar, sharper. Holt's head jerked up just in time to see a rocket-propelled grenade streaking down from the ridge. "RPG!" he screamed. The explosion hit just feet from their position. The shockwave knocked them all flat, ears ringing, bodies aching from the blast. Debris rained down, peppering them with dirt and stone. When the dust cleared, Holt staggered upright, coughing, disoriented. Torres checked himself. Then Lane still alive, but barely. Bear wiped blood from a gash on his forehead, spitting into the dirt. Rains pulled himself up, chest burning, head pounding. He looked at his men battered, bloody, but still fighting. The sight filled him with pride, but also dread. They couldn't take another hit like that. The enemy fire slowed suddenly, almost deliberately. The valley fell into an eerie lull, the silence broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of small fires. "They're repositioning," Bear muttered darkly. "Getting ready to finish it." Rains knew he was right. The pause wasn't mercy. It was preparation. The insurgents were tightening their net, closing the gap until there would be nowhere left to hide. Rains looked at his men, saw the fatigue in their eyes, the blood on their gear, the grit in their teeth. They had given everything already, but the fight wasn't done. He raised his voice, strong, unyielding. "Listen to me. We hold this line. No matter what comes next, we hold. You are SEALs. You are not prey. You are predators. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." The men answered, voices hoarse but resolute. The trap was closing, the noose pulling tight. Death hovered on the ridges, waiting for the final strike. But in the heart of the valley, surrounded and battered, the SEALs squared their shoulders and prepared for the storm. Whatever came next, they would meet it head on. The valley had gone unnaturally quiet. The SEALs crouched low in the dust, weapons ready, lungs burning from smoke and grit. Their ears still rang from the last explosion, but even through the haze, they knew something had shifted. The relentless storm of gunfire had stopped. The silence was worse. Lieutenant Commander Rains peered over the cracked edge of his boulder. The ridgelines loomed in ghostly green through his night vision goggles, jagged and sharp against the starless sky. The enemy wasn't firing anymore. They were waiting, repositioning. He could feel it in his bones, the pause before the killing. Blow. Bear Dalton spat a glob of blood into the dirt and reloaded, the metallic click echoing. "This is it," he muttered, low enough only Holt heard. "They're gonna rush us, finish the job." Holt's mouth went dry. He thought of his family back home, of the training instructors who told him SEALs never quit, never die easy. He gripped his rifle tighter, as if sheer will might keep his hands steady. Torres knelt over Lane, pressing hard on the bandages. Lane's breathing was ragged, his skin ghost pale. Torres' gloves were slick with blood. "Don't you dare? Check out on me," he whispered fiercely. "Not here. Not like this." Raines scanned the ridge one more time. His chest was heavy. He knew Bear was right. The enemy had the advantage. They would come in waves, and when they did, the SEALs would be swallowed whole. He opened his mouth to order his men into final positions when it happened. A single shot cracked through the night, sharp, clean, unlike the chaotic bursts of the ambushers. A man on the ridge dropped instantly, a lifeless rag doll tumbling down the slope. The SEALs froze, so did the enemy. For one suspended second, the entire valley held its breath. Then another shot rang out. Another insurgent fell. And another. Panic rippled through the enemy ranks. Shouts echoed across the ridge, frantic, confused. They scrambled for cover, suddenly vulnerable in a fight they thought they had owned. "Who the hell?" Holt whispered, eyes wide. Bear's jaw dropped slightly, then curved into the faintest grin. "Sniper," he muttered. "One of ours." But Raines shook his head slowly. "Not ours." His voice was low, wary. There were no friendly snipers in the area. No support units within reach. Whoever was up there was unexpected, unaccounted for. The shots kept coming. Precise, surgical. Each round cut through the chaos with deadly calm. Insurgent after insurgent fell where they stood, their bodies collapsing into the dust. It wasn't spray and pray. It was artistry. The enemy's confidence shattered. Their firing broke into scattered bursts, panicked and uncoordinated. Some tried to flee the ridge, only to be picked off mid-sprint. The SEALs seized the moment. "Lay down, suppressing fire," Raines ordered, his voice cutting like steel. Bear roared as he unleashed a hail of rounds at the ridge opposite the sniper's fire. Holt joined in, his shots more confident now, emboldened by the sudden shift. Torres set his rifle down long enough to stabilize Lane's airway, then picked it back up, firing in controlled bursts. For the first time that night, the SEALs weren't just surviving, they were fighting back. On the ridge, the mysterious sniper never missed. Every time a muzzle flash betrayed an enemy, a single shot answered it. The precision was unnerving. It felt inhuman. Raines' mind raced. Who could it be? A CIA asset? A rogue operator? Or something else entirely? The questions gnawed at him, but he forced them down. Whoever it was, their bullets were buying the SEALs precious minutes of life. The insurgents regrouped, rallying behind shouted orders. A few tried to flank along the ridgeline. They never made it. Each one dropped before he could reposition. Bear barked out a laugh, grim and sharp. "Whoever you are, keep sending them to hell." Even Holt found himself whispering a prayer of thanks into the dust. Still, Raines couldn't shake the unease. He scanned the ridges, trying to catch a glimpse of the shooter, but saw only darkness and muzzle flashes. No silhouette, no position. Just death, delivered from the shadows. Minutes stretched. The fight, once so one-sided, had turned into chaos for the enemy. Their advantage of height meant nothing under the sniper's gaze. Their numbers meant nothing when every movement risked a bullet to the skull. Finally, the fire slackened. The ridge that had blazed with muzzle flashes just minutes ago now lay eerily still. The insurgents who hadn't been cut down outright had melted back into the rocks, vanishing into the night. Silence fell again, heavy and strange. The SEALs lowered their rifles slowly, chests heaving. Smoke hung in the valley, acrid and stinging. The ground was littered with spent casings, broken stone and blood. Status. Rains barked. 2 mags left, Bear answered, panting but steady. Not a scratch on me. Lane's critical. Torres said, voice tight, but stable for now, barely. Holt coughed hard, spitting dirt. His cheek burned where shrapnel had grazed him, but he forced a grin through cracked lips. Still standing, sir. Rains nodded. Relief flickered in his chest, but it didn't last. He looked back up at the ridges, scanning again. Whoever had just saved them had disappeared as quickly as they'd arrived. No sound, no sign, not even a flash of movement. Bear broke the silence. Sir, we don't walk out of here without that guy. I don't care if he's ghost, angel, or devil. He just saved our asses. Torres gave a grim chuckle. Hell, maybe all 3. Rains didn't answer. His eyes lingered on the ridge, a mix of gratitude and suspicion in his gaze. He couldn't deny the truth. Without that unseen hand, they'd all be dead. But questions gnawed at him like, wolves. Who was the shooter? Why was he here? And why did he remain hidden, even now? The SEALs huddled closer, using the lull to redistribute ammo, tend wounds, and breathe for the first time in hours. But none of them could shake the same thought. They hadn't survived because of their training. They hadn't survived because of luck. They had survived because someone they couldn't see had chosen to intervene. And somewhere in the mountains, unseen and silent, the shadowed sniper was still watching. For the first time since the ambush began, the valley was still. The echoes of gunfire faded into the mountains, replaced by the ragged breaths of exhausted men. Smoke drifted lazily in the cool night air, curling around the jagged rocks like ghosts reluctant to leave. The SEALs crouched in the dirt, battered and bloodied, but alive. Barely. Lieutenant Commander Rains leaned back against a boulder, chest heaving, ears still ringing. He knew what had just happened wasn't chance. The mysterious sniper had turned the tide. Without him, they'd be corpses cooling in the dust. And yet, Rains couldn't shake the unease knowing at his gut. No ally should have been in this sector. The mission brief had been clear. No friendlies within 50 clicks. Whoever had intervened hadn't been sent by command. And that was almost as troubling as the insurgents themselves. Bear Dalton slammed a fresh magazine into his weapon and checked the ridges with a predator's glare. His forehead dripped blood from a gash he'd barely bothered to bandage, but his grin was feral. Sir, he growled, we've got them rattled. You saw it. They scattered like roaches. Let's press while they're bleeding. Rains shook his head sharply. Negative. We're low on ammo, we've got a man bleeding out, and comms are still down. We move reckless. We die. Bear bristled, his massive frame tensing, but he didn't argue. He knew Rains was right. Still, his eyes burned with the restless fire of a man itching to go on the offensive. Torres crouched over Lane, wiping sweat from his face with a bloody glove. Lane's pulse was weak, his breath shallow. Sir, he's circling the drain, Torres muttered, grim. If we don't get him out soon, he won't see sunrise. Rains cursed under his breath. Extraction wasn't coming. Not with comms. Jammed and the valley crawling with hostiles. They had to fight their way clear. Before he could respond, Holt, his voice low, almost hesitant, spoke up. Sir, what about the sniper? The others looked at him. Holt licked his cracked lips, eyes darting to the ridges. He's not shooting anymore, but he's still out there. He has to be. He saved us. Maybe he's guiding us. Bear let out a humorless chuckle. Guiding, huh? Kid, ghosts don't guide. They kill. Maybe, Holt said, quieter. But he hasn't killed us. Rains didn't answer. He couldn't. Holt wasn't wrong. Whoever the shooter was, his precision had bought them a sliver of hope. But relying on an unknown was dangerous. Still, in their position, dangerous was better than dead. The uneasy silence broke with the stutter of gunfire from the north ridge. Short bursts, probing. The insurgents weren't gone. They were regrouping. Testing. Contact north. Bear roared, swinging his weapon up. The SEALs returned fire, disciplined and sharp. Holt dropped 2 figures trying to reposition. His shots steadier now, his fear tempered into focus. Then it happened again. A single rifle crack echoed from somewhere unseen. One of the enemy fighters crumpled instantly. A hole drilled clean through his skull. The sniper was still with them. See? Holt breathed. He's watching us. Bear grunted, laying down, suppressing fire. Then I hope he keeps watching. The insurgents faltered under the renewed pressure. They had lost their momentum. And the unseen marksman punished every mistake with brutal efficiency. A fighter tried to crawl to a better firing position, dropped. Another rose to rally his men, gone in a heartbeat. The SEALs seized the chance. Shift fire south. Rains commanded, voice cutting through the chaos. We're punching out of this kill box before they tighten it again. Bear, you lead. Torres, keep lane moving. Holt, you're on rear. They moved fast, low, controlled. Years of training turned chaos into rhythm. Bear surged forward like a juggernaut, his weapon hammering controlled bursts that tore gaps into enemy fire. Torres half-dragged, half-carried lane, murmuring encouragement into his ear, even as his own muscles trembled from exhaustion. Holt covered the rear, firing quick, sharp bursts that kept the enemy pinned. Above them, the sniper's fire stitched the ridges, carving a path through the night. It was uncanny, almost, as if he knew where the insurgents would move before they did. His rounds cleared blind corners, shattered ambushes before they could spring. Rains felt the shift in his bones. They weren't prey anymore. They were predators, fighting back with unseen claws at their side. Minutes stretched into an eternity as they clawed their way south through the valley. Every step was contested, every advance bought with sweat and blood. But for the first time since the ambush began, they weren't just holding, they were pushing. Bear whooped as a grenade. He lobbed arced perfectly into a nest of fighters, the explosion rocking the canyon. That's right, run, he bellowed, his laughter grim and wild. Holt gritted his teeth, firing until his last mag clattered empty. Out, he shouted, tossing the useless metal aside. Bear shoved a spare into his chest without looking back. Keep fighting, kid. Rains checked. The ridges again. Bodies littered the rocks. The insurgents' numbers thinned, their confidence shattered. The mysterious sniper had turned what should have been a massacre into a grinding retreat for the enemy. And yet the questions clawed harder at him. Who was this man? Why was he here? Why them? But there was no time for answers. Only survival. Move, Rains ordered, pushing his men forward. We break this valley tonight. They advanced another 50 yards before the fire slackened again. The insurgents melted deeper into the ridges, their taunts silenced, their positions abandoned. The SEALs slowed, weapons raised, ears straining. Nothing. Only the whisper of wind over stone. The fight for now was over. The SEALs collapsed into cover near a cluster of broken walls, panting, sweat pouring down their faces. Torres checked lane again, his grim expression softening slightly. He's hanging on. Barely, bought him another hour. Bear sat heavily, wiping blood and grit from his face. He let out a long breath and muttered, "Whoever that ghost is, I owe him a bottle of the finest bourbon on earth." Holt leaned against the wall, staring up at the ridges. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "He saved us." Rains said nothing. His eyes scanned the dark slopes again, searching for a glint, a shape, a shadow. But there was nothing. Just silence and the weight of unseen eyes. The sniper had vanished, and the seals, bruised but breathing, were left with the bitter knowledge that their survival no longer belonged entirely to themselves. Somewhere out there, hidden in the black mountains, the shadowed sniper still watched. A valley lay quiet again, but it was a silence laced with dread, a kind that never lasted. The seals crouched among the shattered walls, catching their breath, their weapons low but ready. Smoke drifted in lazy spirals from the ridges where the mysterious sniper had carved his deadly path. Lieutenant Commander Rains checked his men one by one. Holt, blood streaked across his cheek, cradled his rifle like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. Bear Dalton sat with his back against the wall, his massive chest rising and falling, sweat carving lines through the dirt on his face. Torres hunched over Lane, whispering to the wounded man, refusing to let the light in his eyes fade. Rains' gut churned. They had survived the trap, survived the pushback, but they were still stuck in this cursed valley with no coms, dwindling ammo, and a man bleeding out. Surviving another ambush wouldn't matter if they couldn't get out. He crouched low, pulling his map from a pouch. His gloved finger traced the ridgelines, the jagged contours that hemmed them in like prison walls. South was their best shot, and now Old Goat Trail winding up to higher ground where, if the gods of war were merciful, they might catch a signal and call for extraction. But it was 2 clicks of exposed terrain, with Lane on a stretcher, and enemies regrouping in the dark. Bear leaned over, eyes narrowing at the map. "That's suicide." "It's worse if we stay," Rains replied flatly. "They'll regroup by dawn, and we'll be boxed in again. This is the only way." Torres looked up from Lane. "If we move him now, he won't make it." Rains' jaw tightened. He had no good answer. Finally, he said, "We don't have a choice." The decision settled like lead in their chests. No one argued further. They all knew the truth movement meant danger, but staying meant death. "Prep for exfil," Rains ordered. "Bear, you and I will clear the route. Holt, rear guard. Torres, you're on Lane. Let's move." The team rose as one, battered bodies finding strength in discipline. Torres secured Lane onto a makeshift stretcher, his hands quick despite the tremor of fatigue. Holt shouldered the last of their ammo, his mind buzzing with fear and determination. They slipped into the darkness, the valley floor crunching under their boots. Every step felt too loud, every shadow too deep. The night pressed down like a living thing, thick and suffocating. Minutes stretched into hours. They moved in silence, communicating only with hand signals. The goat trail rose ahead, a narrow scar etched into the cliffside. Above it, the stars blinked coldly, indifferent to the war below. Halfway up, the first shot cracked. It wasn't the sniper. This one came from the ridge to their flank an insurgent patrol, lying in wait. Tracer fire erupted, slicing the darkness. With red lines, contact left. Bear roared, throwing himself between the fire and Torres' stretcher. His weapon thundered, bursts echoing like drumbeats in the night. Rains dropped to a knee, returning fire with lethal precision. Holt scrambled to cover, firing until his magazine clicked empty. He fumbled for another, hands shaking, then steadied as training overtook panic. Above them, another rifle cracked clean, surgical. One of the insurgents dropped instantly, his. head snapping back. The shadowed sniper was still with them. The fight turned in seconds. Every time the enemy tried to press, a single shot cut them down. Bear swept the ridge with controlled bursts, Holt pinned the flank, and Rains picked targets like a surgeon. Within minutes, the gunfire tapered into silence. Clear. Bear barked, chest heaving. Rains scanned the ridge. The bodies of the body. Ambushers sprawled across the rocks, lit in ghostly green through his NVGs. He waited for movement, for the counterattack, but none came. Only silence. Once again, the sniper had delivered them from death. Move, Rains ordered. Double. Time. They pressed upward, boots grinding on stone, Lane groaning faintly with every jolt of the stretcher. Torres whispered to him constantly, anchoring him to life. Stay with me, brother. Just a little longer. We're getting you out. The trail wound higher, narrower. The drop to their right plunged into blackness, a fall no man could survive. Holt kept glancing over his shoulder, his paranoia gnawing. He couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes, not just the snipers, but the enemies too. Half an hour later, the trail opened onto a plateau. From here, the valley spread below like a wound in the earth, smoke and shadows swallowing its depths. Bear dropped to one knee, scanning with his scope. Movement, he muttered. South Ridge, a lot of it. Rains followed his gaze. Through the green glow, he saw shapes, dozens of them, flowing like ants across the rocks. The enemy hadn't given up. They were converging again, hunting. We can't stay here, Rains said. We push to the come point. Holt, try the radio. Again. Holt unclipped the battered radio, heart pounding. He twisted dials, adjusting frequencies, fighting the static. At first, nothing. Then faint, broken words bled through. Repeat, this is Vulture 2. Anyone copy? Holt's eyes widened. Sir, I've got a bird. Weak signal, but it's there. Rains grabbed the handset. Vulture 2, this is Strike Team Epsilon. We are in heavy contact, multiple wounded, requesting immediate extraction at grid. The transmission dissolved into static. Damn it, Rains snarled, slamming the set against his thigh. But Holt's face lit with a flicker of hope. They heard us, sir. They had to. He'll come. Rains wanted to believe it. Needed to believe it. But looking at the ridges crawling with enemy fighters, at Lane's pale face, at the dwindling mags strapped to their vests, he knew faith. Alone wouldn't save them. The insurgents were closing in again. Their taunts echoed faintly on the wind, cruel and confident. Bear cracked his neck, grinning like a man staring down death. Guess we hold till the cavalry shows. Torres tightened his grip on Lane's stretcher. If they don't hurry, we won't be here to greet them. Rains raised his weapon, eyes narrowing. The sniper had saved them twice already. Maybe, just maybe, he would do it again. As the shadows swarmed closer, the SEALs braced themselves for the final stand. And somewhere in the darkness, unseen, a scope watched over them silent, steady, waiting for the moment to strike. The night felt endless. The mountains breathed with whispers of movement, shadows stalking, voices carrying in harsh Pashto the scrape of boots on stone. The insurgents were closing in. The SEALs crouched in a semicircle on the plateau, weapons leveled outward. Behind them, Torres kept one hand on Lane's weak pulse while gripping his rifle with the other. Holt rechecked his last magazine for the third time, lips dry, eyes wide. Bear flexed his fingers around his weapon, like a predator pacing in a cage, ready to tear into the dark. Lieutenant Commander Rains scanned the ridges, every nerve taut. He could feel them tightening the noose again. But this time, there was nowhere left to retreat. We hold here, he said quietly, firmly. Extraction will come. Until then, nobody breaks. Nobody quits. Bear grinned without humor. Wouldn't dream of it. The first shots cracked from the southern ridge. Tracer fire sliced across the plateau, sparks exploding off the stone. The seals returned fire instantly, the rhythm automatic, ingrained. Every round was precious, each one aimed with ruthless care. Holt picked off a fighter darting between boulders, his hands steady now, his training finally welded to instinct. Torres fired from one knee, then dropped back to check Lane's bandages before firing again. Bear's bursts were thunderous, holding the line like a wall of iron. And then the sniper's rifle spoke. One shot, then another. Always precise, always final. Fighters who thought themselves hidden crumpled where they stood. Ambush dissolved. Before they could spring, the insurgents pressed harder, anger sharpening their voices into shouts of fury. They knew time was their ally. The SEALs' ammo was finite. The sniper might thin their ranks, but numbers were a tide that no single man could stop forever. Minutes stretched into an hour. The plateau became a furnace of sound and smoke. Casings scattered across the stone like brass rain. Holt's weapon clicked empty. Bear shoved another mag at him, without looking, his own weapon roaring non-stop. Torres shouted warnings, dragging Lane deeper into cover. Still, the enemy crept closer, closer. Rains felt it, the line beginning to buckle. His throat burned from shouting orders. His shoulder ached from recoil, but he refused to yield. "Hold," he roared. "We hold this ground." An RPG streaked across the night, slamming into the rocks just feet from Holt. The blast threw him flat, ears ringing, dust choking his lungs. He staggered upright, vision swimming, and almost dropped his rifle until Bear's voice cut through the haze. "On your feet, kid." Still breathing, still fighting. Holt blinked hard, steadied, and fired again. Then, through the chaos, a sound pierced the night rotors. At first faint, then louder. The unmistakable chop of helicopter blades beating the air. "Bird inbound," Holt shouted, hope flaring in his chest. The insurgents heard it too. There. Fire redoubled, furious, desperate to finish the SEALs before rescue arrived. Tracers tore the air, mortar pounded the plateau, the ground shaking under each blast. The sniper's shots grew faster, sharper, cutting down enemy fighters as they tried to rush the ridges. He was buying the SEALs every second he could. Searchlights swept the valley as the bird came into view, a black hawk, low and fast, its guns spitting fire into the ridges. The enemy scattered under the onslaught, but many held their ground, determined to finish what they'd started. "Move, move," Rains ordered. Bear and Holt laid down covering fire, while Torres and Rains hauled Lane toward the landing zone. The Black Hawk hovered, its crew firing nonstop to keep the path clear. Dust and wind whipped the plateau into pool. A storm as the bird descended. An insurgent broke cover, charging with an RPG on his shoulder. Bear saw him, swung his weapon, and fired too late. The rocket streaked toward the helicopter. And then one single rifle crack. The insurgent's head snapped back. The RPG veered harmlessly into the mountainside, exploding in a spray of sparks and rock. The sniper had saved them again. The Black Hawk touched down, its crew waving frantically. Bear and Holt covered the rear, their weapons roaring as Rains and Torres hauled Lane aboard. Holt scrambled in next, then Bear, his face twisted into a snarl of triumph and fury. Rains was the last to climb aboard. As he grabbed the skid, he looked back at the ridges one final time. Through the haze of smoke and dust, he thought he saw him. A silhouette on the far ridge, still and watchful, rifle in hand. The shadowed sniper. Their eyes met just for a heartbeat, or maybe Rains only imagined it. Then the dust swallowed the figure, and he was gone. The Black Hawk lifted, rotors thundering, carrying the SEALs out of the valley of death. Below, the enemy fire dwindled into silence, swallowed by distance. Inside the bird, Torres worked frantically over Lane, shouting vitals to the crew. Bear leaned back against the wall, his chest heaving, a rare smile breaking through the blood and grime. Holt stared out the window, wide-eyed, as the valley shrank beneath them. Raines sat in silence, eyes fixed on the ridges fading into the night. He knew they owed their survival to the sniper, whoever he was, whatever his reasons. Without him, they'd be names carved into stone, not men breathing on this bird. And yet the mystery gnawed at him. No calcine, no acknowledgement, no sign of who or what he was. Only perfect, merciless shots in the dark. Weeks later, safe on base, debriefings circled endlessly. Command wanted answers. Who was the unknown shooter? A rogue operator? A local ally gone off the grid? No one knew. Intelligence scoured the region, but found nothing. The story spread quietly, whispered in mess halls and briefing rooms. The SEALs who lived told it in fragments. The ambush, the hopeless fight. Sudden intervention of a marksman who appeared from nowhere and vanished the same way. They called him the Shadowed Sniper. Some said he was CIA. Others swore he was a ghost, a legend come to life. Among the SEALs, the truth mattered less than the fact he had been there when they needed him most. Lane survived, though barely. Holt carried scars on his cheek that he touched every morning, a reminder of the night he stopped being a rookie. Bear spoke of the sniper only once, raising a glass and muttering, "Wherever you are, brother, you kept us breathing." And Raines? He carried the memory in silence. The weight of unseen eyes, the crack of a rifle in the dark, the fleeting glimpse of a figure on the ridge. Some battles are won by the men in the fight. Others are won by shadows no one can name. The SEALs were trapped and outgunned, but they lived. Because somewhere in the Black Mountains, a hidden rifle chose to open fire. And that night, a legend was born.